Hi, this is Mike from Minimal3DB, and today I'm going to install a BLTouch on my Ender 3 with a Bigtreetech Mini E3 version 3 board. The first step I'm going to take is running the BLTouch wire from the motherboard up to my hot end. I'm going to try doing the BLTouch connector. I'm going to push it through the wire loom and then just work it all the way through till it gets to the hot end. Okay, I've worked the wiring through the sheath here, and I now have the BLTouch wire up here at the hot end. So I'm ready to connect the BLTouch up here and then connect it to the motherboard. If I look at the wiring diagram, you'll notice that the BLTouch plugs in right in here. It's right next to the LCD plug-in. I'm going to go ahead and plug it in on my board. Okay, the BLTouch plug-in is located right here. And I have a plug here, so I'm going to go ahead and push it in. When you're doing this, you want to make sure you have your printer unplugged. Okay, so I have a little bit of extra wire here, that's okay. So that's in place. So the BLTouch is plugged in there, so I'm going to go ahead and install it up here at my hot end. So I have my BLTouch is on my mount, and one of the things I always do is make sure that the BLTouch is very secure on the mount so it's not getting any wiggling. Before I mount the BLTouch, I want to go ahead and move my gantry all the way down to the bed. So that way I can make sure everything lines up appropriately. So I'm just turning the Z by hand here, and I just want it to be, again, touching the bed. So the Z is now touching the bed. As you can see, this is on the bed. And then I have a little circle here I use that I printed. It's 3 millimeters in thickness. So I just keep this print around. And then I'm going to set this down right underneath where BLTouch will be installed. And that will let my BLTouch be 3 millimeters from the tip of the nozzle. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm using the PETS fang. So I have the BLTouch mount for the PETS fang. I'm going to go ahead and install this on the side into the PETS fang. I almost forgot, before I go ahead and screw this in, I'm going to go ahead and plug in the BLTouch cord into the back here. That's plugged in. Now let me screw in the BLTouch into the PETS fang. I've barely screwed in the BLTouch mount, and what I've done is made sure the BLTouch is sitting on top of my 3 millimeter disc here, and this way I know it's the perfect height. Now that I'm just going to leave it sitting on that disc and then go ahead and screw everything in tight. Once I have everything tight in there, I'm going to raise the gantry, the Z gantry again. I'm going to raise that up, pull out my circle, and then just make sure everything's tight, which it appears to be. Now I have to go ahead and fix these wires, so I'm going to clean the wires up a little bit so they're not down by the hot end, and then I should be able to work on the firmware. So I've tightened up my wires, so everything's looking okay. What I'm going to do next is plug in the printer and just make sure the BLTouch comes on, and then I'll configure things. Okay, so the machine's plugged in. The BLTouch has done a test deploy. It's coming on. I should mention this is a BLTouch clone, and I'll put a link to where I got this in the video description. So everything appears to be good. I'm going to go ahead and close up the control box so everything's nice and tidy, and then I'll switch over and work on configuring the firmware. With the wiring all done, I'm switching over to GitHub Desktop. On GitHub Desktop, I'm in Marlin, bug fix 2.1.x. I'm going to click Fetch Upstream just to make sure I have all the latest updates. And then I'm going to click Branch, Menu Item, New Branch, and I'm going to type in Ender 3-SKR-E3-3-BLT. And that way that'll differentiate it from my other firmware. Also make sure that I'm clicking on, I want to do this branch based on bug fix 2.1.x. I'm going to click Create Branch. And then up here at the top, I'm going to publish this to GitHub. And I'll put a link to my repo, again, in the video description. So that's now published to GitHub. In order to get things configured, my new branch, I'm going to open up the Marlin firmware configurations. I'm going to make sure that I'm on bug fix 2.1.x. I'm going to go to Config, Examples. Next, I want to find my printer. Go to Creality, Ender 3, and then here's the SKR Mini E3 version 3. And here are my files. So I'm going to click on configuration.h. I'm going to go over here on this button and copy raw contents. And then I'm going to switch over to VS Code. In VS Code, I'm going to open my project. And the first thing I'm going to do is put some tabs here. I'm going to go to configuration.h. I'm going to hit Control A and Control V. And I'm just pasting in the contents. I'm going to hit Save. So the configuration's done. I'll go over to configuration.h. I'm just going to hit Control. Click in there and hit Control A, delete. And then I'll switch back over to the browser. And I'm going to go to the configuration_advanced and get the copy raw contents. Switch back over to VS Code and paste those contents in there. And then save. I'm going to go ahead and open up the boot screen, hit Control A, delete everything, and then switch back over to browser. And I'm going to grab contents of boot screen. Paste it and save. And then lastly, I'm going to do status screen. I'm going to select all, delete it, and then switch back over to the browser and grab status screen. There's probably an easier way of doing this, but this is the way I do it. On VS Code, go ahead and paste that in. And save. Yeah. So everything, make sure I save all these. Yeah. So everything's saved. So now in VS Code, I'm going to open up the platform INI file. And that If I look at this line right here is set to the default, and I don't want that. So I'm going to again switch back over to my browser, and I can go to Bigtreetech's GitHub page. There it is. And they have a real old version. You can see it's 3 months ago. But I'm going to look at their platform INI and just copy this board out of here. I'll copy that. And in VS Code, I'll go ahead and copy that board right here. Okay. And then let's save this. So everything should be configured. In order to test things, first thing I do, since I've just copied in new configurations, before I make any changes, I'm going to go over and open up Auto Build Marlin, show my ABM panel, and I'm going to go ahead and click Build, because the first thing I want to do is just make sure all the changes I've made work to this point. And then if this works, then I can go ahead and configure, I can optimize and then configure the BLTouch. As you can see, my firmware has compiled successfully, so I'm now able to go ahead and make my changes. I'm going to go ahead down here and just commit what I have. So I'm going to type git add dot, make sure I get any new files I've added. And then I'm going to type git init -a -m, and then I'm going to type in comment, which is updated my configs, and then I'm going to put files, that way I remember, then my quote, and then I'm going to type git push. Go. Now that's all saved. And so let's start making our changes. First file I want to open is config.h. I'm going to start with config.h. I'm going to scroll all the way up to the top. Go ahead and start making some changes. The first change I want to make is I'm going to go ahead and put my name in here. I'm also going to go down here. It says ender 3. So I'm going to change this to 2.1.1 from here. This way, that's my version numbers. Save that. Another quick change I want to make before I get into my big changes. Let's go to config_advanced. I'm going to open up the Finder window and I'm going to type in wizard. I want to make sure the probe offset wizard is on because I use that all the time. That's enabled. I'll go ahead and save that change. And now I want to go ahead and do my systematic changes. Before I even configure the BLTouch, I go ahead and, since I'm a big user of Octoprint, I go ahead and go through and optimize my Marlin installation for Octoprint. I'll put a link to the site I use to find all the settings, and then you'll see what I'm doing. Now, what I'll do is I'll basically, I start off by copying the feature here on the website, and then in code, I use the find feature, find it, and I go ahead and make sure things are enabled. I have two changes here in config.h. Both those are enabled, and then I'll go ahead and start going through all the changes in config_advanced.h. And I'll pause the video, make all those changes, and again, just following along with this website, and then I'll show you what I do next. I've gone ahead and made all my changes to optimize for Octoprint. I'm going to go ahead, and before I touch that BLTouch, I'm going to make sure that all these changes work. Compile. So I'm running the clean real quick. And then I'll just run a build. And I'll switch back over once that's done. The firmware is compiled successfully, so now I want to go ahead and configure for that BLTouch. I use a configuration website. On 3dwork.com, and I'm just going to follow their tutorial to configure my hardware. So I want to go ahead and open up configuration.h, and I'll go ahead and have the find window open. And the first thing I want to do is use zplug options. I want to search for that. And let's compare that. This define, use zmin, xmin. Yeah, that's all correct. Next, we're going to use the zmin as an end stop. Copy that. Paste that into the find. Activate that. Next, I want to activate the BLTouch, so I'll copy BLTouch and paste that into the find window. Find BLTouch, we'll activate that. Now we want to search for nozzle to probe offset. Okay. And I happen to know mine is 48 minus 2. Then I'm going to change this to Z to 0. Save that. Next, we want to activate auto bed leveling by linear. So go ahead back over to find window in VS Code, and we're going to turn off mesh leveling and activate that auto bed leveling by linear. We want to restore leveling after G28, so we want to make sure that's enabled. So I'll paste that into our find window. I'm going to turn off this enable leveling after G28. Deactivate that. Now we're going to search for grid max points. Turns out to 3. Now we're going to turn on Z-safe homing. Let's type in multi. Yeah, we want to go ahead and do multiple probing. Set that to 2. That's good. Now we want to go over to, let's go ahead and save that. And let's go over config underscore advanced. Config underscore advanced, we want to start with baby stepping. Baby stepping is enabled. So that's good. I want to define baby step Z probe offset. And let me just check all these. And let's double click. Yeah, that's right. Okay, let's save this. Okay, since we have that all configured, we're just going to open up plain old VS Code. And we'll open up our show ABM panel. Let's run a clean. And everything should be configured now for our BLTouch. Once that clean's finished, we'll go ahead and compile. We're going to run our build. And I'll switch back over here once this is done compiling. My initial test for the BLTouch didn't work, so what we're going to do is go back over here to the browser and take a look at this BLTouch configuration that Bigtreetech has. We'll scroll down. I'm going to scroll down to the BLTouch, and all these end stop inverting. Let's check those and just check all this over in our configuration.h. So we're all set to false. We're all false there. Okay. Let's turn off this Z end stop and let's use probe for Z homing. I think that's my mistake right there. I think we're all right. So let's save this, compile the firmware again, and then test it on the printer. So I'm going to run a clean, then I'll run build. firmware is compiled successfully. So I'm going to click on firmware.bin. So I'm in my Finder now. Copy my firmware, my SD card, complete the firmware, and paste the new one in. And then eject my SD card. And I'm ready to go over to my printer. Next, I'm going to insert the SD card into my printer. There we go. Go turn the printer on. It's going to take a minute for the firmware to install. Firmware is installed correctly. First thing I'm going to try to do is run a auto home. Now, next steps are I need to configure the Z offset and all that, but as of right now, the BLTouch works. As I mentioned previously, my firmware is loaded to my GitHub repository, and I'll put a link in the video description. If you have any questions, please post them in the comments below and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Again, I want to thank you for joining me and have a good day.